The waiteress said no tables left. Despite my reservation, what would you do if the people who destroyed your family were celebrating at the table you reserved? Would you scream? Would you walk away? Or would you do what I'm doing, buy the entire building in the next 5 minutes and watch the blood drain from their faces when security drags them into the rain? Keep watching. Because the reckoning starts now. They say Miami is a city built on smoke and mirrors. A place where the sun bleaches the truth out of everything until all that's left is a neon-soaked lie. People come here to be seen. They wear their wealth like armor, gold chains thick enough to choke on, logos plastered across their chests like brands on cattle. But I've always preferred the shadows. My name is Ilara Vance. To the world, I'm a ghost. To the board of Vance Global, I'm the woman who turned a bankrupt real estate firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire without ever stepping foot on a red carpet. I don't need the applause. I need the results. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle, the Azure merger, a $300 million deal that would consolidate the entire waterfront. I chose the venue, the Azure. It was the crown jewel of the city. White linen, gold leaf ceilings, and a waitlist that stretched into next year. I dressed simply. A black silk slip dress. No labels. No diamonds. Just a vintage watch that belonged to my father, the only thing I kept after the debt collectors stripped our house bare 20 years ago. The humidity hit me like a wet blanket as I stepped out of my sedan. I didn't use a driver tonight. I wanted to feel the steering wheel. I wanted to feel in control. I looked up at the glowing blue sign of the Azure. I didn't know that in 10 minutes I'd be treated like trash on the very sidewalk I was about to buy. The air inside smelled like expensive lilies and chilled vodka. It's a scent I've come to associate with a specific kind of arrogance. I walked toward the hostess stand. It was a massive slab of polished marble that looked more like an altar than a desk. Behind it stood a girl who couldn't have been more than 22. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her eyes were glued to an iPad. I stood there. 5 seconds. 10. She didn't look up. She was flicking through photos, her long, acrylic nails clicking against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. A sound of pure indifference. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm. Professional. She didn't move. 1 second, she muttered, not even glancing at me. I waited. In my world, patience is a weapon. I watched the way she ignored the phone ringing. I watched the way she smirked at a text message. Finally, she sighed a long, dramatic exhale of someone deeply inconvenienced and looked at me. Her eyes did a price check. It's a look every woman knows. She started at my shoes, unbranded. She moved to my dress, simple. She looked at my hair, no extensions. She decided right then that I was nobody. "Yes? Can I help you with something?" "Reservation for Vance," I said. "Table for 4. 8 p.m. indoors near the window." She didn't even check the screen. She just stared at me. "Vance? I don't see a Vance." "Are you sure you have the right night, sweetie?" That word. It's the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. "I'm sure," I replied. The reservation was confirmed this morning by Mr. Sterling's office. At the mention of the owner's name, her eyes flickered for a millisecond, then turned cold. "Mr. Sterling doesn't handle the books for walk-ins. We are fully committed tonight. There are no tables left. Not for you." I felt a heat rising in my chest. Not the heat of embarrassment, but the slow-burning fuse of a woman who has spent her life being underestimated. "Check again," I said. My voice didn't rise. It got lower. Sharper. "The reservation is under Vance Global. It's a corporate booking." She laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Look, honey, I don't care if it's under NASA. We have a dress code and a reputation. We have high-profile guests arriving. Actual celebrities. We can't have people lingering at the podium." Suddenly, a man appeared behind her. Tall, slicked-back hair, wearing a suit that cost more than it was worth. The manager. He didn't look at me, he looked at the hostess. "Tiffany, is there a problem?" "Just a walk-in, Marcus. She's claiming she has a reservation with Mr. Sterling, but the system is clear." I told her we're full. Marcus finally looked at me. He didn't see the woman who owned the debt on his mortgage. He saw a nuisance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "If we don't have you in the system, we don't have a table. I'm going to have to ask you to clear the entrance." You're blocking the path for our VIPs. As if on cue, the doors behind me opened. A gust of hot air and the smell of heavy perfume entered. A group of young influencers, the kind who live for the flash, strode in. They were loud, draped in logos, filming themselves on their phones. Oh my God, Marcus. Tell me you have our table ready. We need the lighting by the fountain. Of course, Miss Bella, right this way. We cleared the best spot in the house just for you. I watched them walk past me. One of them bumped my shoulder, not even apologizing. Marcus led them toward the very table I had reserved. My table. I felt the eyes of the other patrons on me. The pity. The mockery. The look at the woman who tried to get into a place she doesn't belong. That was my table, I said, turning back to Marcus. He stopped. He turned slowly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. No, ma'am. That was a table for someone who matters. Now, please. Exit the way you came. Before I have security assist you. I stood on the sidewalk. The rain began to fall in heavy, warm drops, soaking through my silk dress in seconds. I didn't move. I just watched through the glass as Marcus laughed with the hostess, pointing at me through the window. I reached into my small clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking, they were perfectly still. I remembered being 12 years old. I remembered the bank putting a lock on our front door while the neighbors watched. I remembered the feeling of being less than. I had promised myself I would never feel that way again. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. My personal attorney. My fixer. Arthur? It's Alara. The Azure Restaurant Group. Who owns the majority stake? The Sterling family? Good. Call their bank. I know they're leveraged for the new expansion in Dubai. Buy the debt. All of it. I want the deed to the building, the liquor license, and the employment contracts on my desk in 20 minutes. I looked through the window one last time. Tiffany was taking a selfie. Marcus was pouring a glass of vintage wine for the influencers at my table. They thought they had won. They thought they had put a nobody in her place. They didn't realize that in 20 minutes, I wasn't just going to be a guest. I was going to be their god. And I'm a very vengeful god. The look on their faces is going to be worth every second of this journey. But let me ask you, have you ever been treated like you didn't matter? Have you ever been pushed aside by someone who thought they were better than you? If you don't subscribe right now, you're telling the world you're okay with Marcus winning. You're choosing to stay outside in the rain. Hit that button and join the inner circle, or go to the comments and explain to me why you're content with being ignored. The choice is yours. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the interior illuminated only by the flickering neon blue of the restaurant sign and the dashboard's soft glow. My silk dress was a second skin now, cold, heavy, and dripping onto the Italian leather. I didn't turn on the heater. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted it to remind me of where I came from. Most people see a CEO and they think of trust funds and private schools. They don't see the girl who stood in line at the food bank with her head down so her classmates wouldn't recognize her. They don't see the girl who watched her father's spirit break in real time when the men in suits took his keys. I looked at my phone. 8 minutes remaining. Arthur was moving. I could see the notifications flickering, emails being CC'd to my private server. The Sterling Group was drowning in bad debt. I wasn't just buying a restaurant, I was buying their oxygen. But then, the doors of the Azure opened again. A woman stepped out onto the covered portico to take a phone call. She was draped in a faux fur stole, holding a martini glass in one hand and a gold-plated iPhone in the other. Bella. Bella the brand, as her 3 million followers called her. But I knew her as Isabella Vance. My stepsister. The woman who had helped her mother strip my father's estate while he was still in the hospital. The woman who had told me, 20 years ago, that people like me were meant to serve people like her. I watched her through the blurred, rain-streaked glass. She looked exactly the same, beautiful, polished, and entirely hollow. She was the VIP they had cleared my table for. She was the reason I was sitting in the dark, shivering. Oh my God, totally. The manager is literally obsessed with me. He kicked some random homeless-looking woman out just so we could have the window view. Miami is so back, babe. The words didn't hurt because they were true. They hurt because, for a split second, I felt like that 12-year-old girl again. The girl with the scuffed shoes and the empty stomach. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My mascara hadn't run, it was waterproof, just like my resolve, but my eyes looked haunted. Isabella didn't know I was here. She didn't know that the random woman she was mocking was the reason her mother's alimony checks hadn't bounced yet. I had been the silent hand, keeping the peace, staying hidden to protect what was left of my father's name. But the peace treaty ended the moment she took my table. I realized then that being the invisible queen wasn't enough anymore. If you stay in the shadows forever, the rats start to think they own the house. It was time to turn on the lights. My phone buzzed. A single text from Arthur. It's done. You are the sole owner of Azure Holdings. The staff contracts have a morality and conduct clause. You have the right to terminate for cause, effective immediately. I felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it was almost painful. I looked at my vintage watch. 8:22 p.m. In 22 minutes, I had lost my dignity, found my past, and bought a kingdom. I stepped out of the car. The rain was still pouring, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I walked toward the entrance. My steps were deliberate. Every heel strike on the pavement felt like a gavel hitting a sounding block. I walked straight past the hostess stand. Tiffany, the girl with the acrylic nails, jumped up, her face twisted in a sneer. Hey! I told you, you can't come back in here. Are you deaf? Marcus. She's back. Marcus, the manager, came power walking from the bar, his face flushed with anger. He put a hand on my shoulder to stop me. A physical mistake. That's it. I'm calling the police. You've been told once, ma'am. You don't belong here. I looked down at his hand on my silk dress, then up into his eyes. Marcus, I said. I didn't whisper this time. My voice carried across the silent dining room. Even Isabella stopped talking. I'd take your hand off me before the police arrive. Because when they get here they aren't going to be looking at my reservation. They're going to be looking at your embezzlement records. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. But I wasn't done, not even close. There is a specific kind of silence that happens when the power dynamic in a room shifts by 180 degrees. It's heavy. It's thick. It feels like the air before a lightning strike. Marcus's hand stayed frozen on my shoulder for a fraction of a second too long. I could feel his fingers trembling through the wet silk of my dress. He wasn't looking at a nobody anymore. He was looking at a woman who knew a word that could end his life. Embezzlement. Take it off, I whispered. He pulled his hand back as if my skin had turned into white-hot iron. He tried to swallow, but his throat looked tight, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously behind his overpriced silk tie. I don't know what you're talking about. You're making scenes. You're delusional. Tiffany, call security. Now. Tiffany reached for the phone at the podium, her acrylic nails clicking frantically against the plastic. But I didn't look at her. My eyes were locked on table 12. Isabella was staring. She had lowered her gold iPhone. The smug, brand-ready smile was gone, replaced by a look of squinting confusion. She recognized my face, but her brain couldn't reconcile the sister she left in the gutter with the woman standing in the center of the world's most exclusive dining room. I didn't wait for Marcus to move. I walked past him, heading straight for the window table. Every step felt like I was walking through 20 years of memory. I remembered Isabella's mother throwing my father's books into the rain. I remembered Isabella laughing when I asked if I could stay in the guest room for just one night after the eviction. She told me then that Vance was a name for winners, and since I had lost everything I should probably start using my mother's maiden name. I stopped at the edge of the table. The influencers around her looked annoyed, but Isabella, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Elara? Is that? No. It can't be. Hello Isabella, I said. I reached out and picked up her martini. I didn't drink it. I just swirled the liquid, watching the olive dance. You're in my seat. Excuse me? Who is this? Bella, do you know this woman? She's literally dripping water on the floor. Isabella stood up, her faux fur slipping off her shoulders. Elara, what are you doing here? This isn't, you don't belong in places like this. Look at you. You're a mess. Did you follow me here? Are you asking for money again? I didn't answer her. I turned back to Marcus, who had scurried over like a loyal dog trying to protect its master. Marcus, I said, loud enough for the entire section to hear. When you started working for the Sterling Group 3 years ago, you were $600,000 in debt. Gambling, if I recall. Within 6 months, you were driving a Ferrari. Within a year, you bought a condo in Brickell. That's none of your business. I worked hard for what I have. You worked hard at creating shell companies, I replied. I pulled my phone out and turned the screen toward him. It showed a list of produce suppliers that didn't exist. Companies that had been billing the Azure for 5 times the market rate for 3 years. You've been skimming 15% off the top of every bottle of wine, every steak, and every reservation fee you've pocketed in cash. You think the Sterlings are too rich to notice? You're right. They are. But I'm not. Marcus looked at Tiffany. A look of pure, unadulterated panic passed between them, and that's when I saw it. The necklace. Tiffany was wearing a small, diamond-encrusted M pendant. It was hidden behind her lapel, but as she leaned forward in fear, it swung out. It matched the cufflinks Marcus was wearing. They weren't just co-workers, they were partners. In everything, Tiffany wasn't just a rude hostess, she was the bookkeeper. She was the one who deleted the reservations of nobodies like me so they could sell the tables for cash to people like Isabella, cash that never made it to the corporate account. I looked at Isabella. She was smiling now, a small, cruel little smirk. So what, Elara? You found some paperwork. You're a stalker. You're obsessed. Marcus, call the police. Tell them a crazy woman is harassing your guests. You heard her. Out. Now. He reached for my arm again. This time, he wasn't just pushing, he was trying to drag me. I didn't fight him. I didn't have to. I just looked at the door. 3 men in dark suits entered, led by Arthur. Behind them were 2 men in uniforms, not the police. Security, my security. Mr. Miller? I'm Arthur Vance, Chief Legal Counsel for Vance Global. I believe you've just laid hands on our chairwoman. Marcus stopped. His hand dropped from my arm as if he'd been electrocuted. He looked at Arthur, then at the men behind him, and finally, slowly, back at me. The restaurant went so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the glass 100 feet away. Isabella's martini glass slipped from her hand. It shattered against the marble floor, the gin and the olive soaking into the hem of her expensive dress. Chairwoman, she whispered. I stepped closer to her, leaning in until I could smell her expensive perfume. I told you, Isabella, I whispered. You're in my seat. And now, I'm going to need you to leave my building. They say that power is the best detergent. It cleans up the mess. It washes away the insults. But as I stood there, looking at Isabella's trembling lower lip and Marcus's waxen face, I didn't feel clean. I felt heavy. 20 years of being the ghost had taught me how to move without being seen. But now, the spotlight was so bright it was blinding. Every patron in the room, the billionaires, the socialites, the people who had looked through me 10 minutes ago were now staring at me like I was a rare exhibit. Arthur stepped beside me, his presence like a wall of granite. He didn't need to say anything. The briefcase in his hand was the only weapon we needed. Elara? Isabella's voice was different now. The sharp, jagged edge of her brand had crumbled. It was the voice of a little girl who had just realized the floor was made of glass. You can't be the chairwoman of Vance Global. That was my father's name. I'm the one who kept the name alive while you were busy spending the remains of his estate on followers, I said. My voice was hollow. I didn't just keep the name, Isabella. I bought the legacy you threw away. I turned my back on her. I couldn't look at her anymore. It hurt too much to see my father's eyes in the face of a woman who didn't care if I starved. I walked toward the podium. Tiffany was backed against the wall, her hands over her mouth. The diamond necklace was shaking against her chest. Tiffany, isn't it? I asked. I reached onto the marble slab and picked up her iPad. I was just doing what Marcus told me. He said if I didn't help him with the bookings, he'd find someone else. I need this job. You didn't just need the job, I said, scrolling through the hidden VIP cash log she hadn't had time to close. You needed the $5,000 handbags and the weekend trips to Tulum. You didn't care who you stepped on to get them. You certainly didn't care about the walk-in in the black dress. I looked at Marcus. He was sweating now, despite the aggressive air conditioning. This is a mistake. A huge misunderstanding. Mr. Sterling will never let you do this. He's my friend. Mr. Sterling signed the transfer of ownership at 8:14 p.m., Marcus. He's currently on a flight to Dubai, likely wondering how he missed a $4 million hole in his operating budget. A hole we've mapped out for him. In detail. I looked around the room. I saw the waiters standing frozen with their trays. I saw the kitchen staff peeking through the swinging doors. They were terrified. And for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. These people had families, they had rent, they had lives. But then I saw a waiter, a young man, maybe 19, standing by the bar. He had a bruise on his forearm. I watched as he looked at Marcus with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I realized then that Marcus wasn't just stealing from the owners. He was a tyrant to the people under him. He was the same kind of man who had foreclosed on my father. A man who used a title to crush anyone he deemed lesser. Tonight wasn't just about my reservation. It was about a systemic rot. Arthur, I said, my voice projecting to every corner of the room. Effective immediately, the Azure is closed for a private audit. All guests are to have their tabs comped. Please escort them out. Except for table 12. I watched as the elite of Miami were ushered into the rain. They didn't complain. They were too afraid of the woman who had just executed a corporate coup in the middle of dinner. Soon it was just us. Me, Arthur, my security, the trembling staff, and Isabella's group. Isabella's friends were already leaving. They didn't want to be tagged in a post about a scandal. They were brand conscious. After all, they left her sitting there, alone, surrounded by half-eaten appetizers and the smell of spilled gin. I walked over and sat down in the chair opposite her. The chair I had reserved weeks ago. Do you remember the night of the eviction, Isabella? I asked. She didn't look up. She was staring at the shattered glass on the floor. I remember you asking for my coat, she whispered. I told you it was cashmere and you'd ruin it. And I remember standing in the rain for 3 hours waiting for a bus that never came, I said. Tonight, I stood in the rain again, because of a woman you trained, because of a culture you represent. Isabella finally looked up. Why are you doing this, Alara? You have everything now. Why come back and humiliate me? Is this just about a table? It's not about the table, Isabella, I said. I pushed the top document toward her. It wasn't a firing notice. It was a foreclosure notice. It's about the fact that your mother used Vance Global funds to secure your mansion in Coral Gables. Funds she wasn't entitled to. Funds I just clawed back. You told me once that people like me are meant to serve people like you. Well, Isabella, the bill is due. And you're out of credit. Suddenly, Marcus screamed. Not a scream of anger but of fear. He was looking at the security monitors by the podium. No. You can't do this. They're here. I didn't even turn around. I knew who was at the door. I had called them the moment Arthur confirmed the debt purchase. The night was just getting started. And Marcus was about to find out that embezzlement was the least of his problems. Panic has a distinct smell. In a place like the Azure, it's usually masked by expensive cologne and the scent of seared wagyu. But tonight, as Marcus stared at those monitors, the smell of his sweat was sharp, metallic and cold. He wasn't looking at the front door. He was looking at the camera feed for sublevel 2, the wine cellar, a place where the public and even most of the staff were never allowed to go. You can't go down there. The pipes. They're bursting from the rain. It's a liability. Arthur, tell her. It's a safety hazard. I stood up slowly, ignoring Isabella, who was still staring at the foreclosure notice like it was a death warrant. I walked toward Marcus. He backed away, hitting the marble podium with a dull thud. Marcus, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I own the pipes. I own the water. And I own the liability. I turned to my head of security, a man named Elias who looked like he was carved out of granite. Elias, take the master key. I want every door in sublevel 2 opened. Now. The elevator was too slow for my adrenaline. We took the service stairs. As we descended, the air changed. The scent of lilies and luxury evaporated, replaced by the damp, heavy smell of concrete and old secrets. Marcus was being escorted by 2 of my men. He wasn't walking. He was being dragged, his expensive Italian loafers scuffing against the industrial steel. We reached the heavy steel door of the private cellar. Marcus had told the Sterlings this was where the $50,000 vintages were kept. The private collection. Elias swiped the card. The locks disengaged with a series of heavy hydraulic thuds. The door swung open. It wasn't a wine cellar. There were bottles, yes, racks of them covered in dust to maintain the illusion. But in the center of the room sat a high-end server rack, its blue lights blinking like malevolent eyes in the dark. Beside it, A desk with 4 monitors displaying high-definition feeds from every hotel room in the Sterling Azure complex next door. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it hit a wall. This wasn't just embezzlement. Marcus hadn't just been stealing money. He had been stealing information. Blackmail. The VIPs he was so eager to seat. He wasn't serving them dinner. He was harvesting their secrets. Is this why you were so protective of your VIPs, Marcus? You weren't selling tables, you were selling their privacy. I was just the middleman. You don't understand who's behind this. If you turn those servers off, I'm a dead man. We're all dead. Marcus's personal phone, which Elias had confiscated, began to ring. The caller ID didn't have a name, just a string of zeros. I took the phone. I looked at Marcus. He was shaking so hard his teeth were literally chattering. I pressed accept and put it on speaker. Marcus. The feed for room 402 is down. Fix it in 3 minutes, or we'll find a use for that insurance policy your mother signed. The line went dead. I looked at the server. I looked at the monitors showing a high-ranking senator sitting on the edge of a bed in the hotel next door, unaware that his career was being digitized in a basement beneath a restaurant. This went deeper than a rude manager. This was a shadow empire. And I had just bought the front door. Elara. It was Tiffany. She had broken away from the guards upstairs. She stood in the doorway, her face streaked with mascara, gasping for air. You have to leave. Right now. Marcus didn't build this. They did. And they're already in the building. They saw you on the cameras. They're coming for the servers. As if on cue, the lights in the basement flickered and died. In the sudden, suffocating darkness, the only thing I could hear was the heavy clank of the service elevator descending. Someone was coming, and they weren't here for a reservation. Darkness is a funny thing. For most people, it's a shroud. It's where fear grows. But for me? The darkness has always been my boardroom. I spent 20 years building an empire from a basement apartment with a flickering bulb. I don't need my eyes to see a threat. The elevator was 30 feet away. Marcus was sobbing now, a pathetic wet sound in the corner. Tiffany was paralyzed in the doorway. Elias. Tactical lights. Now. Elias and my security team moved with the precision of a clockwork watch. They didn't aim the lights at the elevator. They aimed them at the reflective surfaces of the wine racks, creating a strobe effect that would disorient anyone stepping out of that lift. Arthur, I said, my voice as cold as the concrete. Get the primary drive out of that server. I don't care if you have to rip it out with your bare hands. That is our shield. And our sword. I expected monsters. I expected men in tactical gear with silenced weapons. Instead, out stepped a man in a charcoal suit, looking like he had just walked off a yacht. He was middle-aged, silver-haired, and wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him were 2 associates, the kind of men who didn't have names, only roles. He didn't look at the servers. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked directly at me, squinting against Elias's lights. Miss Vance, I must say, your timing is impeccable. Buying a bankrupt holding company on a Tuesday. Bold. Very bold. But you've stumbled into a room that isn't on the deed. Everything on this property is on my deed, I replied. I stepped into the path of his light, including the illegal surveillance of a sitting senator. Who are you? I'm the man who ensures Miami stays vibrant. Those servers contain the insurance policies of this city's future. Now, be a sensible businesswoman, take your restaurant, fire this idiot Marcus. But leave the basement to the professionals. I saw the stranger's eyes flicker toward the server. He saw Arthur pulling the black box out of the rack. Don't do that, Miss Vance. That drive contains information that would burn this state to the ground. You won't even make it to the parking lot. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear. You're right, I said. It would burn it down. Which is why it's already being uploaded. I held up my phone. The screen showed a progress bar. Vance Global Cloud Sync 98% complete. The moment the power went out, my team's secondary hotspot activated. In 10 seconds, those insurance policies will be sitting on a secure server in Zurich, programmed to be sent to the Department of Justice if my heart rate ever drops below 60 beats per minute. The stranger's smile finally vanished. For the first time tonight, the predator realized he was looking at a trap. I watched the man in the charcoal suit. He was calculating. He could kill me, but he'd lose everything. He could negotiate, but he had nothing I wanted. Get out, I said. You're making a very expensive enemy, Alara. I've been poor, and I've been hated, I replied. Being an enemy is a luxury I can finally afford. Elias, escort these gentlemen to the service exit. If they ever set foot in a Sterling property again, the Zurich files go live. I watched them step back into the elevator. The stranger didn't say a word. He just stared at me as the doors closed, his eyes memorizing my face. I knew it wasn't over. But for tonight, I had the drive. I turned to Marcus. He looked like a broken toy. Please, he whimpered. They'll kill me now. You took their drive. They'll kill me for letting you in. I looked at him, the man who had insulted me, the man who had pushed me, the man who had built a life on the misery of others. You're right, I said. They probably will. Which is why you have exactly 5 minutes to tell me everything about your VIP Isabella. Why was she really here tonight, Marcus? He looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. She wasn't just a guest, Alara. She was the one who told them about the senator. She's the one who set the trap. My own sister. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The betrayal I thought I understood was just the surface. Isabella wasn't just a spoiled influencer. She was the architect of my father's ruin. And she was still building. They say the truth will set you free. But they never mention that sometimes the truth feels like a lungful of smoke. I stood in the elevator, the black server drive heavy in Arthur's hand. I looked at the reflection in the polished steel doors. My hair was damp. My silk dress was ruined. But my eyes, they looked like my father's the day he lost his company. Hard. Final. I had spent years thinking Isabella was just a symptom of a shallow world, a spoiled girl who got lucky. I never imagined she was the disease itself. The elevator doors opened. The dining room of the Azure was empty now, bathed in the dim emergency lighting. It looked like a graveyard of luxury. But at table 12, the Viper was still waiting. Isabella didn't run. She was sitting there, nursing a fresh drink she must have poured herself from the abandoned bar. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of bored indifference. But I saw the way her fingers tightened around the glass. You're still here, Alara? Honestly, the drama is getting a bit tired. You bought the building. Congratulations. Can I go home now, or are you going to keep me hostage in this tomb? I didn't sit. I stood over her, casting a long shadow across the white linen. I just came from the basement, Isabella, I said. My voice was a dead calm. I met your business partners. The man in the charcoal suit sends his regards. The glass in her hand wobbled. A single drop of gin spilled onto her faux fur. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm an influencer, Alara. I don't have partners in basements. You're right. You're not a partner, I said, leaning in. You're a scout. You find the powerful men, the ones with secrets to hide, and you bring them here. You lead them to the VIP tables where Marcus has the microphones hidden. You've been selling out your own social circle for years. I pulled a small, silver flash drive from my pocket, the one Marcus had given me in exchange for his life. But that's not why I'm angry, I whispered. Marcus told me about 20 years ago. He told me about the investor who tipped off the banks about our father's internal restructuring. The tip that triggered the immediate foreclosure. It wasn't a bank spy, Isabella. It was you. You were 18 years old, and you sold our father's life's work to the Sterling Group for a down payment on a penthouse and a kickback from the basement servers. He was going to lose it anyway. He was weak, Alara. He was obsessed with integrity while the world was moving on. I just made sure I didn't go down with the ship. The silence that followed her confession was louder than the thunder. She didn't deny it. She was proud of it. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't a Vance. She was just a parasite that had outgrown its host. You think you're a survivor, I said. But a survivor builds. You just scavenge. You've been living off the blood of the people you pretend to be friends with. And now? You've run out of hosts. I showed her the screen of the phone. It was a live feed of the news. Breaking. Sterling Restaurant Group under federal investigation for mass surveillance. The Zurich files have been sent, Isabella. Not to the Department of Justice. I sent them to every person on that server. Every senator. Every CEO. Every friend you've ever invited to this restaurant. Her eyes went wide as her phone lit up. Incoming call, Senator Miller. Incoming call, the mayor. Incoming call, the brand agency. The world she had built on secrets was collapsing in real time. They know, Isabella, I said, turning to walk away. They know it was you who brought them here. And in this city, being a traitor is the only sin they don't forgive. You can't do this. I'm your sister. Alara. Come back here. I didn't look back. I stopped at the door, where Tiffany was still standing, trembling. Tiffany, I said. Yes, Miss Vance. Call her an Uber. But make sure it's the cheapest one available. She doesn't have a reservation anymore. The viper has been defanged. My sister is sitting in the ruins of her own lies, and the most powerful people in Miami are currently looking for her head on a platter. But the revenge is only halfway done. We still have a father's name to clear and a shadow empire to dismantle. If you're not subscribed, you're basically Isabella watching the world burn without the courage to take a side. Subscribe now, or tell us in the comments, is there anything worse than a sister who sells your soul for a penthouse? Revenge is a dish best served cold? No. That's for amateurs. Revenge is a dish best served legally. It was 2 a.m. We were on the 54th floor of the Vance Global building. Below us, Miami looked like a circuit board of gold and blue. Somewhere down there, Isabella was likely running for her life. And Marcus was probably in the back of a black sedan explaining his failures to people who don't accept apologies. I had changed out of the ruined silk dress. I was wearing my father's old oversized Harvard sweatshirt and leggings. I didn't need the CEO armor anymore. I was the hunter now. Arthur stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, 3 different phones lined up on the glass ledge. He looked at me, his eyes tired but sharp. The sterling stock is already into a free fall in the pre-market overseas. The news of the surveillance is spreading like a wildfire in a dry forest. But Alara, the board isn't just going to fold. They're digging in. I looked at the projection. The Sterling Group was a hydra. The restaurant was just one head. They had real estate, private security, and a shipping arm that moved half the luxury goods in Florida. They think I'm playing for the restaurant, I said. I traced the line of their debt with my finger. They think this is about a table and a grudge. Let them think that. What's the real play? We don't attack the Hydra's heads, Arthur. We poison the blood. I want you to short their logistics arm. Then, I want you to call the port authority. Tell them we have evidence thanks to Marcus's server that Sterling Shipping has been bypassing customs for the VIP guests. I felt a cold thrill. This wasn't just about my sister anymore. This was about the entire machinery that allowed people like her to exist. For years, I stayed anonymous so the world wouldn't see me coming. Tonight, that was my greatest weapon. The Sterling board didn't know Alara Vance. They knew a Vance Global entity. They thought they were fighting a faceless corporation. They didn't realize they were fighting a daughter with a memory like an elephant. I pulled out a leather-bound journal. My father's journal. In the back, he had written a list of names. The friends who had stopped calling the day the bank arrived. 3 of those names were now on the Sterling board of directors. They were the architects of his heartbreak. They thought they had buried the past. But I was the past, and I had just spent 20 years learning how to dig. Arthur, I said, handing him a signed authorization. Release the secondary files to the senator's legal team. But tell them they didn't come from me. They came from an anonymous concerned citizen. Let the senator be the one to tear down the Sterling board. He has the subpoena power. I just provide the bullets. And Isabella? She's been calling the office every 5 minutes. I looked at the phone. It was vibrating again. Isabella, 34, missed calls. Block her, I said. She doesn't exist to me anymore. She's just another line of bad debt I've decided to write off. I froze. My security team at the door moved into position, hands on their holsters. Miss Vance. You can't go in there. A voice shouted from the lobby. The doors flew open. It wasn't the men in charcoal suits. It wasn't the police. It was a woman I hadn't seen in 2 decades. Isabella's mother. My stepmother. The woman who had started this war when I was 12 years old. She looked frantic, her jewelry jangling, her face pale with a terror I had never seen before. Alara, you have to stop. You don't know what you've done. They have Isabella. They took her because of the servers. I felt my heart stop. I had dismantled the trap. but I had left my sister inside it. If hatred were a fuel, I could have powered the city of Miami for a century on what I felt for the woman standing in my doorway, Catherine. My stepmother. The woman who taught me that a smile is just a way to hide the teeth before a bite. She looked older. The Botox couldn't hide the way her skin sagged under the weight of genuine terror. She wasn't the polished predator who had tossed my childhood toys into a dumpster 20 years ago. She was a woman who had finally realized that the world she built was made of sand. Do you hear me, Elara? They took her. 2 men in a black sedan, right outside her apartment. They said if the Zurich files aren't deleted by dawn, they'll send her back to me in pieces. I didn't move. I didn't even stand up. I looked at her through the cold lens of 2 decades of silence. You're in the wrong office, Catherine, I said. My voice was like a flat line on a heart monitor. You should be at the police station. Or perhaps calling one of those powerful friends you sold my father out for. Catherine ran to my desk, her hands slamming onto the glass. Her expensive rings left streaks in the condensation. The police can't help. You know who these people are. You touched the servers, Elara. You're the only one who can stop this. Please. She's your sister. Your own blood. Blood? I asked. I stood up then, the chair rolling back with a sharp clack. You didn't care about blood when you blocked my number while I was sleeping in a bus station. Isabella didn't care about blood when she gave the Sterling Group the keys to our father's safe. Maybe this is just the market correcting itself, Catherine. A life for a life. I saw the light go out in her eyes. She collapsed into the guest chair, the chair meant for billionaires and business moguls, and buried her face in her hands. She looked small, pathetic. Catherine's phone slid across the desk toward me. A video call was incoming, no caller ID. I didn't wait for her permission. I swiped the screen. The image was grainy, low light. It was a basement but not the one at the Azure. This one was industrial, smelling of salt and diesel. Isabella was tied to a chair. Her faux fur was gone. Her face was bruised, her eyes wide with a primal fear I had only seen in animals. But she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at someone off-screen. I did what you asked. I gave you the senator. I gave you the names. Why are you doing this? Because your sister is more talented than you, Isabella. She didn't just find the files, she secured them. Now, she's going to trade them for you. Or she's going to watch you pay the interest on her debt. I looked at the black screen. I looked at Catherine, who was now on her knees, sobbing at my feet. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had spent 20 years wanting to see Isabella suffer. I had spent every waking hour dreaming of the moment her world crumbled. But as I saw her in that chair, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick. Because if I let them kill her, I wasn't the girl who survived. I was just the girl who became them. Arthur, I said. My voice was different now. The CEO was gone. The hunter was back, but the target had changed. Elara, don't. You can't give them those files. If you do, they'll kill you too. I'm not giving them anything, I said, picking up my father's Harvard sweatshirt and pulling it on. I'm going to go get my sister. And then I'm going to burn the rest of their world down. I turned to Catherine. I didn't help her up. Go home, Catherine. Pray to whatever God you haven't sold out yet. I walked toward the private elevator. Elias and my security team were already checking their earpieces. I knew where they were. The smell of diesel and salt on the video, the background hum of a specific kind of generator. There's only one place in Miami that sounds like that. The Sterling shipping yard. I was walking into a trap. I knew it, they knew it, but they forgot one thing. I'm a Vance. And we never leave a debt unpaid. The Sterling shipping yard at 3 a.m. isn't a place for people. It's a graveyard of iron and salt. This is where the things Miami wants to forget come to rest. This is where the VIP lifestyle of the Azure meets the cold, hard reality of the machinery that sustains it. I sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, watching the gates through the thermal scope on Elias's tablet. The yard was a labyrinth of stacked containers, blue, red, and rusted orange, creating narrow corridors where 1,000 men could hide. Thermal shows 6 heat signatures in warehouse 4, Elias whispered, 2 at the door, 3 around the girl, 1. Pacing. I checked my watch. The Zurich files were scheduled to release in exactly 90 minutes. I was the only person on Earth who could stop the clock. I didn't let Elias go first, I stepped out into the rain. I wanted them to see me. I wanted the cameras to pick up the invisible queen walking into their trap without a weapon in her hands. Arrogance is a blindfold. The man in the charcoal suit thought he was playing a game of leverage. He thought I was coming to beg for my sister's life. He didn't realize I was coming to settle a debt that started before Isabella was even born. I walked down the central aisle of the yard. The shadows felt alive. I could feel the crosshairs on my back. I could smell the diesel and the dead fish. I'm here. I have the encryption key. Let the girl go, or the senator gets his morning news early. The warehouse was a cathedral of rot. Giant crates were stacked to the ceiling, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. In the center, under a single, flickering halogen light, was table 12. Not the real table from the restaurant. A mockery of it. A wooden crate covered in a blood-stained white sheet. And sitting there tied to a rusted chair was Isabella. She looked up at me. Her hair was matted with rain and sweat. She tried to scream, but the duct tape over her mouth turned it into a hollow, terrified moan. Standing behind her was the man in the charcoal suit. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked tired. He looked like a man whose empire was leaking from 1,000 holes. Miss Vance, you're early. I appreciate a woman who values punctuality. Do you have the drive? I have something better, I said. I held up a small, palm-sized remote. I have the off switch for your entire existence. The stranger laughed, but the sound was thin. You think you're in a position to threaten me? My men have eyes on your security team. They're pinned down at the gate. You're alone in my house, Alara. This isn't your house, I replied. I stepped closer, the light from the halogen lamp hitting my face. This is a sterling shipping yard. And as of 40 minutes ago, Vance Global purchased the holding company that owns this land. You're trespassing on my property. Ownership? You think papers matter here? They do when the papers are accompanied by a Port Authority seizure order, I said. Behind me, the sky began to glow. Not from the sun, it was too early. It was the blue and red strobes of 50 police cruisers and federal units, rolling into the yard in total silence, their lights finally cutting through the rain. The stranger's face went from pale to ghostly. He grabbed Isabella by the hair, pulling her head back, and pressed a snub-nosed revolver to her temple. Tell them to back off. I'll kill her. I swear to God, I'll take her with me. I didn't flinch. I looked at Isabella. In that moment, through the bruises and the terror, our eyes met. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't looking at me as a rival. She was looking at me as her sister. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the real server drive. You want the secrets? I asked, my voice rising above the roar of the helicopter. Catch. I threw the drive. Not to him. I threw it into the dark, toward the massive, open industrial shredder at the back of the warehouse used for destroying contraband. The stranger had a choice. The girl, or the secrets. He let go of Isabella and lunged for the drive. Greed is a gravity that pulls you toward your own destruction. I watched the man in the charcoal suit dive. He didn't even think. He didn't look at the tactical teams breaching the north wall. He didn't look at me. His entire universe had shrunk to the size of a black plastic rectangle tumbling through the air. He caught it. His fingers closed around the drive inches from the shredder's spinning steel teeth. For a split second, he smiled. He thought he had saved his empire. But he forgot that I don't play games I haven't already won. The drive wasn't the server backup. It was a decoy. A shell filled with lead weights and a GPS tracker that had just led the FBI directly to his primary server farm in the Everglades. I didn't stay to watch him realize it. I was already running. I hit the concrete floor next to the rusted chair. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of 20 years of suppressed rage suddenly turning into something else. Pity. I sliced the tape from Isabella's mouth. She didn't scream. She just collapsed against my chest, her forehead pressing into my father's Harvard sweatshirt. She smelled like salt, copper, and the rain. You came? Why? After what I did. Why didn't you just let them? I didn't answer her immediately. I pulled the zip ties from her wrists. Her skin was raw, purple with bruises. Because our father didn't raise a murderer, Isabella, I said. My voice was thick, like I was swallowing glass. And because I needed you to be alive to see the world you built burn down. You don't get to die a martyr. You have to live as a Vance. I helped her stand. She was shaky, her legs barely holding her. She looked at the man in the charcoal suit, who was now pinned to the floor by 4 agents, screaming about his rights and the drive. She looked at the luxury she had sold her soul for, now scattered on a dirty warehouse floor. They're going to take everything, aren't they? The house. The brand. I'm going to be just like you were. No, I said, turning her to face me. You're going to be worse off. When I lost everything, I had my integrity. You? You're going to be the girl who sold out her friends to a blackmailer. You're going to be the girl who betrayed her father for a penthouse she couldn't keep. I reached into the pocket of my sweatshirt and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. It was the only thing I had saved from the eviction 20 years ago. A photo of us as children, sitting on the porch of the house we lost. I placed it in her bruised hand. That's the last piece of Vance property you'll ever own, I said. Arthur and Elias appeared through the smoke and the strobe lights. They looked at Isabella with disgust, but they looked at me with a reverence that made me uncomfortable. Alara, the senator is on the phone. He wants to know if the anonymous citizen is ready to make a statement. I looked at Isabella one last time. She was clutching the photograph, her tears carving clean tracks through the dirt on her face. Tell the senator the citizen has done her part, I said. The rest is up to the courts. I turned to Elias. Get her to a hospital. Secure wing. No press. No phones. After she's cleared, take her to the old house. The one in the suburbs. The one I bought back last year. The little house? With the squeaky porch. It's the only place you won't be hunted, I said. But don't think it's a gift. It's a penance. You'll live there, Isabella. And you'll work. Real work. For the first time in your life. The world stopped. The agents froze. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Elias tackled me to the ground, shielding my body with his. Isabella screamed. The man in the charcoal suit was still pinned. It wasn't him. I looked toward the shadows near the shredder. A figure was standing there. Someone who had been hiding in the dark the entire time. Someone I hadn't accounted for in my chess game. It was Marcus. He was holding a small, silver pistol. His eyes were wide, vacant, the eyes of a man who had already died inside. But he wasn't aiming at the police. He was aiming at the server drive, the real one that had fallen out of my pocket during the scuffle. If I can't have the secret, Marcus rasped, his voice echoing through the cathedral of iron, then nobody gets to know who really killed your father. Alara. My father didn't die of a heart attack. That was the lie I had lived with for 20 years. The official story. The comfortable truth. The stress of the foreclosure, the doctors said. The weight of the world, the lawyers said. But as I looked at Marcus shaking, wild-eyed, and clutching a smoking gun, the world tilted on its axis. He hadn't shot me. He hadn't shot Isabella. He had shot the industrial drive I'd dropped, the bullet shattering the casing and sending a spray of sparks into the dark. What did you say, Marcus? My father died in a hospital. Alone. Because of the debt you helped create. Debt. You think a few $1 million kills a man like Jonathan Vance? He was going to fight it, Alara. He had the evidence to put the Sterling board in prison for life. He was going to the feds the next morning. I saw it in my mind. The sterile white room. The smell of antiseptic. I was 18, sitting in the hallway because they wouldn't let me in during the procedure. Marcus stepped forward, the light hitting his face. He looked pathetic, but his words were venomous. I was there, Alara. Not as a manager. I was a tech consultant back then. I knew how to override the medical monitors. I knew how to make a heart stop without leaving a trace on the autopsy. My lungs felt like they were filled with lead. Every breath was a struggle. The man who had insulted my clothes, who had stolen my table, who had humiliated me, was the same man who had pulled the plug on my life. And he had been working for the Sterlings the entire time. I felt a heat rise from my stomach that I have never felt before. It wasn't the calculated coldness of a CEO. It was the primal, jagged rage of a daughter who had just discovered her father was murdered. I stepped toward Marcus. I didn't care about the gun. I didn't care about the police behind me screaming for me to stay down. You killed him for a promotion? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like a storm. You took a man's life so you could wear a better suit. I did what I had to do. The Sterlings promised me everything. But then they put me in that restaurant. They made me a servant. They treated me like I was nothing. Just like they treated you. Marcus looked at the shattered drive on the floor. He realized he hadn't just destroyed the evidence, he had destroyed his only leverage. The police were closing in. The stranger in the charcoal suit was already in cuffs. There was no one left to protect him. If I'm going down, I'm taking the truth with me. He turned. He didn't aim at me. He didn't try to run. He threw the gun into the shredder, and then with a look of terrifying peace, he began to lean backward toward the spinning steel teeth. No, I screamed. I lunged for him. I didn't want him to die. I needed him to talk. I needed the names. I needed the proof. Marcus's head snapped back before he could fall into the machine. A single red dot danced across the concrete floor, then disappeared. I was tackled to the ground by Elias. Sniper, someone yelled. Southeast perimeter. We have a shooter. I lay there, the cold water of the warehouse floor soaking into my clothes, looking at Marcus's lifeless body. The man who knew the truth was gone. The evidence was shattered. But as my eyes traveled across the floor, I saw it. The bullet Marcus had fired at the drive. It hadn't destroyed the disk. It had lodged into a hidden compartment in the back of the server rack. A compartment I hadn't seen. A compartment containing a handwritten envelope. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pulled it toward me. On the front, in handwriting I would know anywhere, strong, elegant, and familiar. For Alara. When the shadows find the light. There is a silence that only comes after a death. It's heavy, like the air before a hurricane. Marcus lay 10 feet away, a puppet with his strings cut. The man who held the keys to my father's murder was gone, silenced by a bullet from a shadow I couldn't see. But the letter. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than the billion-dollar empire I had built. I sat on a shipping crate, ignoring the federal agents processing the scene. My fingers were stained with grease and salt, but I handled the paper as if it were made of spun glass. The ink was faded, dated 3 days before my father's heart attack. You knew, didn't you, Dad? You knew they were coming. I could almost hear his voice as I read. It wasn't the voice of the defeated man the world remembered. It was the voice of the man who used to read me bedtime stories about kings and dragons. Alara, it began. If you are reading this, the game has reached its final move. I have spent years building a legacy for you and Isabella. But I realized too late that I was building on a foundation of vipers. The Sterling Group is just a mask. The man who truly orchestrated the foreclosure, the man who is currently paying Marcus to watch me in this hospital bed, is someone I once called a brother. My breath hitched. A brother? My father was an only child. I read the next line, and the warehouse seemed to dissolve around me. He doesn't use the name Vance. He took his mother's name to hide his connection to our family's original estate. He is the silent partner in every move the Sterlings have made. His name is Arthur Vance Sterling. But the world knows him only as Arthur, my lead counsel. Your mentor. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked up. 20 feet away, Arthur was talking to a federal agent. He was pointing at the server rack, his face a mask of professional concern. The same Arthur who had guided me for 15 years. The same Arthur who had helped me buy the restaurant tonight. The man who had been helping me seek revenge was the one I was seeking it against. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. Why was Arthur always able to find the right leverage? Because he created it. Why did he encourage me to stay in the shadows? So he could control the light. He didn't want me to win. He wanted me to consolidate the power so he could eventually take it from me. He was the shadow architect. The distorted voice on the phone. The man who had Isabella kidnapped to force me to bring the files here where he could have Marcus killed and the evidence destroyed in the chaos. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the letter in my hand. His expression didn't change, but his eyes. They went from warm to ice-cold in a heartbeat. You shouldn't have opened that, Alara. Some legacies are better left buried. It would have been so much simpler if you had just stayed the invisible queen. We were standing in the middle of a federal raid, surrounded by police, and yet, I had never been more alone. You killed him, I said. It wasn't a question. I cleared the path for us, Alara. Look at what you've achieved under my guidance. Together, we own this city. Don't let a dead man's ghost ruin a living woman's empire. He leaned in closer, his voice a lethal whisper. Give me the letter, Alara. or Isabella's hospital wing will become her mausoleum before the sun comes up. They say the best way to defeat a monster is to let it think it's already won. Arthur was staring at me, his hand still in his pocket, the barrel of his silenced pistol aimed through the fabric at my ribs. He looked at me with the same paternal pride he'd used for 15 years, the pride of a man who thinks he's built a perfect weapon. But he forgot one thing. He taught me how to hide my heart. "You're right, Arthur," I said. I let my hand tremble just enough to satisfy his ego. I let a single tear trail through the dust on my cheek. What is a legacy compared to a life? Isabella has suffered enough. I handed him the envelope. I watched his fingers close around it, the last piece of physical evidence connecting him to my father's murder. He smirked, that thin, corporate smile that used to make me feel safe. "Good girl, Alara. We'll tell the feds that Marcus acted alone. We'll bury the rest. By tomorrow morning, Vance Global will be the most powerful entity in Florida. And you'll be at the head of the table." "There's just one problem, Arthur," I said. I tapped the face of my watch. "You taught me to stay in the shadows. But you forgot that the shadows are where the microphones are hidden. Did you think I came to a federal raid without a wire? You're bluffing. My jammers are active. Nothing leaves this warehouse." "Your jammers work on radio waves," I replied, my voice gaining a lethal edge. "They don't work on a hardwired fiber optic line running through the very server rack you told me to purchase tonight." Arthur's face didn't just go pale. It turned the color of ash. He looked up at the speakers. He looked at the federal agents who had stopped moving and were now drawing their weapons. Their eyes locked on the chief legal counsel. "It's not just the warehouse, Arthur," I said. "I'm the invisible queen, remember? I have a live stream going to the senator's office, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet in Miami. You didn't just confess to me, you confessed to the world. You little bitch. You destroy everything we built for a dead man." He pulled the gun. He didn't care about the agents anymore. He didn't care about the cameras. He was a cornered wolf. Elias was faster. He didn't shoot Arthur. He didn't need to. He tackled me into the shadows as the tactical team swarmed. I watched through the smoke as Arthur was slammed against the very shipping crate where I had sat. The envelope, my father's letter, flew from his hand, fluttering through the air like a white bird before landing in a puddle of dirty rainwater. It didn't matter. The recording was the deed. The confession was the execution. I walked toward him as the agents forced his head against the metal. He was screaming, cursing my name, promising that I'd never survive the night. I leaned down, my face inches from his. "You said you built me, Arthur. You were right. You built the woman who was smart enough to see through you. You didn't build a weapon. You built a mirror. And you just realized you hate what you see." Arthur was led away in silence. The shadow architect was just a man in a ruined suit, walking toward a cage he had spent 20 years designing for others. I stood in the center of the warehouse. The rain was finally stopping. A sliver of gray dawn was beginning to cut through the Miami skyline. But then, Elias walked over to me. He wasn't looking at the prisoners. He was looking at his phone, his face grim. "Elara. We have a problem. The hospital wing. The security team I sent to guard Isabella. They're not answering. And the tracker in her room just went dark." Arthur was the architect. But he wasn't the only one in the room. I looked at the water-soaked letter on the floor. I realized there was one more page I hadn't read. A page that had been stuck to the back. The brother my father mentioned. He wasn't talking about Arthur. We spend our lives running from the truth, thinking we're getting faster, stronger. But the truth doesn't chase. It waits. It waits until you've won your battles and you're too tired to fight the war. I ignored Elias. I ignored the federal agents. I picked up the final, sodden page of my father's letter. My hands were numb as I pulled it apart. "Alara," the ink was bleeding now, turning into blue ghosts on the page. "Arthur is the greed. He is the hand that takes. But there is another. The one who provided the poison. The one who believed that the Vance name belonged to him by right of the oldest blood, my father's first son. The one the world thinks died in the fire of '82. The dead uncle. Julian Vance." I looked at the tracker on Elias's phone. Isabella wasn't at the hospital. She was moving. And she was moving toward the only place in Miami that wasn't on any map. The old family estate in the Everglades, the one that had burned down 40 years ago. I didn't take the SUV, I took a motorcycle. I needed to move faster than the law. I needed to move as fast as the rage in my chest. Arthur was a corporate shark. He wanted money. He wanted power. But Julian, if the stories my father whispered were true, Julian wanted something much worse. He wanted the legacy. He wanted the Vance name to be synonymous with fear. The Everglades at dawn is a world of bone-white trees and black water. I saw the silhouette of the old manor, a charred skeleton of a house, half swallowed by the sawgrass. And there, parked in the tall grass, was a vintage black Cadillac, my father's car, the one that was supposed to have been crushed decades ago. I walked through the skeletal front door. The roof was gone, replaced by the pale morning sky. Sitting in the center of the ruins, in a rocking chair that looked brand new, was a man who looked exactly like my father. But where my father's eyes were filled with light, this man's eyes were like two holes burnt in a sheet. Isabella was there too. She wasn't tied up this time. She was sitting on a crate at his feet, looking at him with a terrifying kind of devotion. He says it's okay, Elara. He says the Sterlings were just the beginning. He says we're going to take it all back. Together. I realized then that the kidnapping hadn't been a kidnapping at all. It was an invitation. Julian hadn't taken her by force. He had taken her by the heart. He had given her exactly what she wanted, a reason to feel important again. She's a child, Julian, I said. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the letter. And you're a ghost. You died 40 years ago because you couldn't handle the weight of being a Vance. You're not here for the legacy. You're here for the revenge. I am the legacy, Elara. Your father was a weak man who played by the rules of a world that hated him. I built the Sterlings from the shadows to test him. He failed. Arthur failed. But you? He stood up. He was taller than I expected. He walked toward me, his movements fluid and predatory. You bought a building to spite a waitress. You dismantled a shadow empire in 4 hours. You are exactly what I've been waiting for. He reached out a hand that looked like mine. Take your sister. Take the Vance name. And let me show you how to truly rule this city. I looked at his hand. I looked at Isabella, who was watching me, waiting for me to say yes. Waiting for us to be a family again. I felt the pull of it, the power, the safety of being the one who holds the leash. I have a reservation, Julian, I said. My voice was a whisper that cut through the wind. At a table you'll never be invited to. I pulled my phone out. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Arthur. I pressed a button that I had programmed years ago as a scorched earth failsafe for Vance Global. If I can't have a legacy of honor, then the Vance name ends today. It takes 15 years to build $1 billion empire. It takes exactly 4 seconds to delete it. I watched Julian's face as the notification hit his own phone. The Vance Sterling accounts, the offshore trusts, the shell companies that fed his ghost existence, they didn't just freeze. They vanished. I had redirected every cent of the Vance Global liquidation into a blind charitable trust for the victims of the Sterling surveillance ring. The Vance name didn't belong to the boardrooms anymore. It belonged to the people whose lives had been sold for secrets. You've destroyed it. Everything our bloodline built. You've left yourself with nothing, Elara. You're a nobody again. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I was light. I was always a nobody, Julian, I said. That was my strength. You and Arthur. You were so busy decorating the cage that you forgot I held the key. I turned to Isabella. She was still sitting on that crate, looking at her hands. The photograph of us on the porch was still clutched in her fingers, but it was ruined, soaked in swamp water and dirt. The cycle ends here, Isabella, I said, extending my hand one last time. Not as a CEO, not as an influencer, just as a sister. The bike is outside, we can go to that house in the suburbs. We can start over. No logos, no lies, just the truth. Isabella looked at Julian, then at me. I saw the struggle in her eyes, the hunger for the crown versus the need for a home. I don't know how to be just a sister, Elara. Neither do I said. But I'd rather learn that than keep playing a game where the only prize is a golden coffin. Julian didn't move. He didn't try to stop us. A man who lives for power has no weapons against someone who has walked away from it. He sat back down in his rocking chair, a king of ashes, waiting for a world that no longer knew his name. We walked out of the ruins. The Miami skyline was visible in the far distance, a shimmering lie of glass and steel. I knew that by noon, the news would be screaming about the CEO who threw it all away. They'd call me crazy. They'd call me a failure. But for the first time in 20 years, when I looked at my reflection in the motorcycle's mirror, I didn't see a Vance. I didn't see a chairwoman. I saw Alara. And she was enough. I went back to the Azure one last time, a month later. It was under new management, now a cooperative run by the former kitchen staff. There was no VIP list. No velvet rope. I sat at the window table, the one I had fought for. I wore a simple black dress. No labels. No jewelry. Not even my father's watch. I'd given that to the Museum of Miami History. The waitress, the same one Marcus used to bully, walked up to me. She didn't recognize me. "Good evening. Welcome to the Azure. Do you have a reservation?" I smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "No," I said. "I'm just a walk-in." "Of course," she replied, pulling out a chair. "We always have room for you. In a world that tells you that you are only as valuable as the table you sit at or the name on your business card, remember my story. Power isn't about what you can buy. It's about what you are willing to walk away from to keep your soul." They told me there were no tables left, so I bought the building. But I only found peace when I realized I didn't need the building to be whole. The game is over. And the light is finally here. If you've stayed with me, you've seen the rise and fall of an empire. You've seen what happens when the nobodies finally stand up. If you don't subscribe right now, after everything we've been through, then maybe you're still waiting for a reservation that's never coming. Don't stay in the dark. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you would never sell, no matter the price? I'll see you in the shadows. Or maybe, I'll see you in the light.